They told him his baby was dying. They didn't expect the maid to look inside the incubator. Elliot Wainwright had learned to trust systems. They worked. They were precise. They didn't hesitate. So when doctors at the NICU told him his only child, little Claire, was failing, he believed them. Naomi Brooks didn't. She wasn't a doctor. She didn't have a badge or a clipboard. She was the one who stayed when visiting hours ended, who spoke to Claire softly and watched for the small changes no one charted. That night, while alarms kept repeating the same story, Naomi leaned in closer than she was supposed to. She opened the incubator, and what she saw inside made her pull the baby out without asking permission. Most people would have stepped back at that point. Naomi dropped to her knees instead, because once you see what she saw, walking away isn't an option. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. The monitors beeped in rhythmic unison, casting green shadows across baby Claire's fragile form. Dr. Rebecca Sloan stood at the foot of the incubator, tablet in hand, her expression grave as she studied the cascading data streams. "The monitor shows critical instability," Dr. Sloan said, her voice measured but firm. She tilted the screen toward Elliot, pointing to red flag numbers that meant nothing to him but everything to her training. Elliot's hand trembled as he gripped the incubator's edge. His daughter, barely 3 pounds of fighting spirit, lay swaddled in tubes and wires, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The wealth that built empires couldn't buy her another heartbeat. Naomi stood in the corner, her maid's uniform replaced by borrowed scrubs, watching the scene unfold with growing unease. She'd held Claire just 20 minutes ago during the feeding attempt. The baby had been fussy, yes, but not the near-death portrait these numbers painted. She was calm just minutes ago, Naomi said quietly, stepping closer. Dr. Aaron Patel glanced up from his notes, his expression polite but dismissive. "Machines don't get confused, ma'am. Neonatal vitals can crash without warning. It's the nature of prematurity." Naomi bit her tongue. She learned early in life that some battles aren't won with words. They're won with persistence when everyone else walks away. The numbers on that screen didn't match the baby she'd been caring for around the clock. But who was she to challenge doctors who'd spent decades in these halls? Dr. Sloan placed a gentle hand on Elliot's shoulder. "We're doing everything medically possible. Sometimes these fragile ones just decline. We need to prepare for all outcomes." Elliot nodded numbly, his empire-building confidence shattered against the helplessness of watching his only child slip away. This is usually where people accept the explanation and leave, where hope bends to authority, where questions die in throats too tired to ask them. The medical team began their exit, voices lowered in that practiced hospital sympathy. Elliot followed, needing air, needing space, needing anything but the sight of those declining numbers. Naomi stayed behind after everyone else stepped away. Alone with Claire, she approached the incubator. The baby's eyes fluttered open, meeting hers with unexpected alertness. Naomi's breath caught. She glanced at the monitor, critical readings, screaming danger. Then back at Claire, calm, aware, fighting. Something was desperately wrong. And it wasn't the baby. The NICU hummed with mechanical precision. Ventilators breathing for tiny lungs, for pumps delivering measured hope. Naomi remained at Claire's bedside, her instincts refusing to let her walk away like the others had. She studied the baby's face, searching for signs of the critical decline the monitors screamed about. Claire's color was good, pink, not the gray-blue of oxygen deprivation. Her breathing, though shallow, maintained a steady rhythm that contradicted the erratic readings flashing above. Naomi reached through the porthole to adjust the bedding, a simple act of comfort she'd performed countless times. The smallest gestures often matter most when the world tells you nothing else can be done. As she smoothed the blanket around Claire's miniature form, her fingers brushed against something unexpected inside the incubator's hood. Paper, folded, deliberately hidden. Her heart quickened. She glanced toward the nurse's station, where Nurse Allison Kerr sat updating charts, her back turned. Naomi's fingers found the edge of the tag, partially tucked between the incubator's heating element And it's outer shell, a place no parent would ever reach, no casual observer would ever see. "Why would this be here?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise. The question hung in the sterile air like a prayer seeking answers from an indifferent heaven. She began to pull the tag free, her pulse hammering against her ribs. "Please don't touch anything." Nurse Kerr's voice cut through the moment. She'd appeared silently, her expression strained, not angry, but afraid. Naomi's hand froze. Their eyes met across the incubator, and in that fraction of a second, Naomi saw something that chilled her more than any failing monitor knowledge. Nurse Kerr knew something was there. If you stop listening here, you'll only hear what the charts say. The sanitized version, the official story, the convenient explanation that protects institutions while babies suffer. Naomi's fingers tightened around the folded paper. Nurse Kerr took a step forward, her hand raised in warning or plea. "You don't understand what you're—" Naomi unfolded the tag. The fluorescent lights seemed to flicker as the words came into focus, each letter a tiny detonation in her mind. Her breath stopped. Claire stirred in the incubator, alive and fighting, while the machine that should have been saving her revealed its terrible secret. The tag trembled in Naomi's hands, its edges worn as if it had been hidden and retrieved multiple times. For words printed in red capital letters, "Failed calibration, do not use." Below, in smaller print, a date. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of false readings. 3 weeks of doctors making life and death decisions based on numbers that meant nothing. They knew. Naomi breathed, her voice hollow with dawning horror. Nurse Kerr's face had gone pale, her eyes darting toward the nurse's station, where 2 other staff members remained absorbed in their tasks. She moved closer, her whisper urgent and trembling. "You didn't see that. Please, you didn't see that." But Naomi had seen it, and sometimes seeing is the burden God places on those willing to carry it, the terrible gift of knowing what others choose to ignore. She looked at baby Claire, peacefully sleeping despite the monitor's claims of crisis. Then back at the machine, its screen ablaze with false alarms designed to justify a predetermined outcome. Her mind raced through the implications. Dr. Sloan's resignation to Claire's decline. Dr. Patel's quick dismissal of her observations. The way the medical team had presented terminal deterioration as inevitable, when in reality they were reading data from a broken machine. How many decisions had been made based on these lies? How close had they come to removing life support from a baby who was actually stable? "How long have you known?" Naomi demanded, her voice low but fierce. Nurse Kerr's eyes filled with tears. "I could lose my license. My family depends on—" "A baby could lose her life." The words landed like a gavel. Most people would still trust the system at this point, would convince themselves there must be a reasonable explanation, would defer to authority, would choose the comfort of ignorance over the responsibility of truth. Naomi wasn't most people. She tucked the tag into her pocket, her decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. Whatever conspiracy of silence protected this secret, it ended tonight. Naomi opened the incubator door. The motion triggered an immediate alarm, a piercing wail that brought every head in the NICU turning toward them. Nurse Kerr gasped, reaching out to stop her, but Naomi was already lifting Claire into her arms. The baby's warmth against her chest confirmed everything the tag had revealed. Claire was fighting. Claire was alive, and someone had been planning to let her die. The alarm shrieked through the NICU like a death knell, but Naomi barely heard it. Claire nestled against her chest, warm and breathing, her tiny fingers curling reflexively against Naomi's scrubbed top. The baby's heartbeat, steady, real, unmistakable, pulsed against her palm. Within seconds, the room filled with controlled chaos. Dr. Patel rushed toward them. Nurse Kerr stood frozen in guilty paralysis, and from the administrative hallway emerged Marjorie Feldman. The hospital administrator moved with practiced authority, her heels clicking against linoleum like a countdown. Her expression held no warmth, no concern, only calculation. She assessed the scene with cold efficiency. The open incubator, the crying maid, the unauthorized contact with a critical patient. "Remove the child from monitoring," Marjorie said, her voice crisp and final. She gestured to an orderly who'd appeared behind her. Naomi's grip tightened. She's still breathing. This is end-of-life comfort, Marjorie replied, as if explaining simple arithmetic. She nodded toward the incubator, and 2 staff members began disconnecting it from the wall. When institutions decide your story is over, they write the ending before you've finished the chapter. The incubator was quietly wheeled away, its faulty screen still flashing red warnings into the hallway shadows. Evidence disappearing in real time, wrapped in the language of compassionate care. No, the word tore from Naomi's throat. Her knees buckled under the weight of what she was witnessing. A murder disguised as mercy, a cover-up dressed in hospital protocol. She sank to the floor, cradling Claire against her body, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Sloan appeared, her expression conflicted. Naomi, please. You're not authorized to. She's alive. Naomi sobbed, rocking Claire gently. Can't you see? She's fighting. Marjorie's jaw tightened. Security, please escort. The NICU doors burst open. Elliot Wainwright stood in the entrance, his tie loosened, his face haggard from pacing the corridors, trying to escape his daughter's death. His eyes found Naomi immediately, kneeling on the floor, clutching his baby, surrounded by medical staff who looked more like executioners than healers. What's happening? His voice carried the dangerous quiet of a man whose world had just shifted on its axis. Most people think this is the moment it ends, where authority reasserts control, where explanations smooth over inconvenient truths, where the powerful protect the system and the vulnerable are silenced. Elliot walks in and sees Naomi on the floor. His gaze moved from Naomi's tear-stained face to his daughter, pink-cheeked and breathing, then to the empty space where the incubator had been, to Marjorie's calculated composure, to the staff members who suddenly couldn't meet his eyes. Someone, he said slowly, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, needs to tell me why my daughter's caregiver is on the floor and why her equipment just disappeared. The NICU had gone silent except for the ambient beeping of surrounding monitors. Elliot Wainwright stood like a monument to paternal fury, his billionaire composure stripped away to reveal something far more dangerous, a father realizing he'd been lied to. Marjorie Feldman adjusted her posture, summoning her practiced institutional authority. Mr. Wainwright, your daughter's condition has deteriorated beyond. Why was my child in that machine? Elliot's question cut through her rehearsed explanation like a scalpel. He pointed to the hallway, where the incubator had been wheeled. And why did it leave the moment I walked in? Protocol was followed, Marjorie said, her tone suggesting the conversation was closed. Naomi rose from the floor, still holding Claire. The truth doesn't need permission to be spoken. It only needs someone brave enough to voice it. She reached into her pocket with her free hand and pulled out the crumpled tag, its red letters visible even from a distance. Then why hide the tag? Naomi held it up, her hand steady despite her racing heart. The air seemed to crystallize. Dr. Sloan's eyes widened. Nurse Kerr took an involuntary step backward. Dr. Patel's face drained of color, and Marjorie Feldman's carefully constructed expression cracked just enough to reveal the calculation beneath. Elliot crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the tag from Naomi's outstretched hand. His eyes scanned the words once, twice, 3 times, as if repetition might change their meaning. Failed calibration, he read aloud, his voice deadly quiet. Do not use. Dated 3 weeks ago. He looked up at Marjorie. 3 weeks. Equipment failures happen, Marjorie began, her voice smoothing into damage control. We have redundancy protocols. You told me she was dying. Elliot's words came out strangled. You showed me charts. Numbers. You said her vitals were crashing. He held up the tag. Based on a broken machine? Dr. Sloan found her voice, though it trembled. Mr. Wainwright, we have other monitoring systems that. We're using them. Naomi interjected, her question hanging like an indictment. Or were all your decisions based on that incubator? The silence that followed was answer enough. If you walk away now, you'll believe this was an accident, a simple equipment malfunction, an honest mistake in the chaos of intensive care. But Naomi had seen Nurse Kerr's fear, watched the incubator disappear with suspicious speed, heard the administrator order comfort care with unseemly haste. Elliot turned to Dr. Sloan, and in his eyes burned something that made hospital administrators nervous: the promise of unlimited legal resources and zero tolerance for evasion. "I want every machine in this unit tested. Now." Dr. Sloan swallowed hard. "I'll order immediate recalibration." The words echoed through the NICU like a confession, because if the machines needed recalibration now, they had needed it 3 weeks ago. And someone had known. Marjorie's composure finally cracked. "Dr. Sloan, that's not necessary." "Do it," Elliot commanded, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "And pull every record related to my daughter's care. Every reading, every note, every decision made in the last 72 hours. In Naomi's arms, baby Claire stirred and yawned, blissfully unaware that her tiny life had just exposed a conspiracy of negligence, and that the real battle was only beginning. The replacement incubator arrived within minutes, a speed that suggested such equipment had always been available. Naomi watched as Nurse Kerr, her hands trembling with something between relief and dread, carefully placed Claire inside the pristine unit. The new monitor flickered to life. Numbers cascaded across the screen in calm, steady green. Heart rate, 148 beats per minute. Oxygen saturation, 96%. Respiratory rate, 42 breaths per minute. Temperature, 98.1 degrees Fahrenheit. Every single reading within normal range for a premature infant. Dr. Patel leaned closer to the screen, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally horrified comprehension. "These readings are normal." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Around them, the NICU staff had gathered, some drawn by curiosity, others by the creeping realization that they'd been complicit in something unforgivable. Dr. Sloan stood beside the incubator, her professional composure crumbling as she watched Claire's stable vitals populate the monitor. Sometimes the truth arrives not with thunder, but with the quiet beeping of a machine finally telling the story it should have told all along. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "They always were." The admission shattered something in the room. Naomi pressed her hand against her mouth, tears streaming freely now, not from grief, but from the overwhelming vindication of knowing she'd been right, that her instincts, dismissed and ignored, had been accurate all along. "I knew it," she sobbed, reaching through the porthole to touch Claire's tiny hand. "I knew she was fighting." Elliot stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the monitor displaying his daughter's healthy vitals, the vitals that had existed beneath 3 weeks of faulty readings, 3 weeks of doctors preparing him for loss, 3 weeks of decisions made on manufactured data. Dr. Sloan turned to face him, and in her eyes was the terrible weight of medical failure. "Mr. Wainwright, we relied on the primary monitoring system. Standard protocol is to check your equipment," Elliot said, his voice hollow. "Is to question anomalies. Is to trust your eyes as much as your machines." Nurse Kerr spoke up, her voice cracking. "I tried to flag it. 2 weeks ago, I submitted a concern about the readings not matching my observations. It was filed as nursing anxiety. Most people never stay long enough to hear this part. The moment when the conspiracy of silence starts to fracture, when those who knew pieces of the truth finally speak them aloud, when the system's self-protection begins to unravel." From the doorway, Thomas Keene, the hospital's risk management officer, appeared with a tablet and a grim expression. He'd clearly been summoned the moment Elliot demanded records. His eyes moved from the new monitor to the assembled staff to Naomi, still in her borrowed scrubs, still crying, still standing guard over the baby everyone else had given up on. Risk officer begins documentation. He opened a digital form, his fingers hovering over the screen. "I'm going to need statements from everyone present, and I need to know." He looked directly at Marjorie Feldman, who'd been conspicuously silent since the new readings appeared. "Who authorized the use of equipment marked for decommission?" The question landed like a grenade with the pin pulled. Marjorie Feldman had built a career on crisis management, the art of making problems disappear through carefully worded policies and strategic silence. But standing in the NICU, watching a billionaire's rage crystallize and a risk officer's documentation begin, she understood that this problem would not disappear. Elliot took a step toward her, and despite his rumpled appearance, despite his emotional exhaustion, he carried the unmistakable presence of a man who'd built empires by knowing when someone was lying to him. "You let my child fade," he said, each word measured and lethal. "You watched me prepare for her death. You ordered comfort care. And all of it," he gestured toward the monitor showing Claire's stable vitals, "was based on equipment you knew was compromised. Mr. Wainwright, I understand you're upset, but—" "Upset?" The word came out like a bitter laugh. "My daughter is alive despite your hospital, not because of it." Marjorie's jaw tightened. When the powerful are cornered, they reveal themselves, and what emerged now was not compassion, but calculation. We avoided escalation. Equipment failures are documented incidents that trigger regulatory reviews, insurance complications, potential lawsuits. The baby was being monitored through redundant systems. "That's a lie," Nurse Kerr interjected, her voice stronger now. The incubator was the primary system. All treatment decisions flowed from those readings. Thomas Keene looked up from his tablet. "Miss Feldman, are you saying you were aware of the calibration failure and chose not to file an incident report?" The silence stretched. In that pause, careers balanced on edges, and truth demanded its reckoning. "We avoided escalation," Marjorie repeated, as if the phrase itself was shield enough. Naomi stepped forward, still in her borrowed scrubs, still marked by tears, but standing taller than she had any right to stand in this room of doctors and administrators. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the largest truths, not because they're loud, but because they refuse to be silent. "You avoided responsibility," she said quietly. "There's a difference." The words hit harder than any of Elliot's fury, because Naomi wasn't speaking from power or privilege. She was speaking from having held a dying baby who wasn't actually dying, from having been dismissed and ignored, from having seen the machinery of institutional self-preservation value its own reputation over a child's life. Dr. Sloan found her voice, and in it was something that sounded like redemption seeking a foothold. "I should have questioned the readings. When they didn't match the clinical presentation, I should have insisted on equipment verification." She looked at Naomi. "You tried to tell me. I'm sorry." Elliot turned to Thomas Keene. "What happens now?" The risk officer's expression was grave. "Full investigation. Equipment audit across all departments. Review of every patient case that used the compromised incubator. And," he looked directly at Marjorie, "determination of who knew what, and when they knew it. Leaving now means pretending this system didn't almost win, that the failure was individual rather than institutional, that this was an isolated incident rather than the symptom of deeper rot. But Elliot Wainwright hadn't built his fortune by accepting comfortable lies. I want the hospital board notified tonight. I want the investigation announced publicly. And I want every family whose child was in that unit contacted and informed." Marjorie's composure finally shattered completely. "Mr. Wainwright, the publicity alone could save the next child," Naomi finished, her voice steady now. "Isn't that supposed to be the point?" In the incubator behind them, baby Claire stirred, alive, stable, and completely unaware that her tiny life had just forced a reckoning that would ripple far beyond this room. The investigation was beginning, and this time, there would be no convenient silence. Dawn broke over Cedars-Sinai Medical Center with a different kind of light, the kind that follows revelation. In the NICU, baby Claire slept peacefully in her new incubator, her vitals steady, her tiny chest rising and falling with the determined rhythm of survival. The hospital had transformed overnight into a flurry of accountability. Equipment auditors moved through every ward, their scanners checking calibrations, their clipboards filling with findings that would take months to fully process. Thomas Keene's investigation had expanded beyond a single incubator to encompass the entire culture of silence that had allowed it to remain in use. But in the quiet corner where Claire's incubator hummed, a smaller, more profound reckoning was taking place. Elliot Wainwright sat in the chair he'd occupied for 72 hours of manufactured grief, but his posture had changed. The defeated slump was gone, replaced by something harder to define: gratitude mixed with rage, relief tangled with guilt. Naomi stood beside him, no longer in borrowed scrubs, but back in her simple street clothes, preparing to leave now that the crisis had passed. She'd refused the hospital's offer of a private room, refused their carefully worded requests to sign non-disclosure agreements, refused everything except the chance to see Claire one more time before she went. "You did what money couldn't," Elliot said finally, his voice rough with emotion he'd spent a lifetime learning to contain. Sometimes the most powerful discover that their greatest asset isn't what they own, but who they listen to. Naomi shook her head gently. "I just refused to leave her." The simplicity of the statement belied its profound weight. In a system designed to move people along, to trust authority, to defer to credentials and titles, Naomi had committed the radical act of staying, of watching, of trusting her instincts over institutional certainty. Dr. Sloan approached, her white coat somehow looking less authoritative than it had days before. She'd spent the night reviewing every decision she'd made, every reading she trusted, every moment she dismissed Naomi's concerns. The weight of it showed in her eyes. "That changed everything," Dr. Sloan said, addressing Naomi directly. "Your refusal to accept our conclusion. Most families, they trust us. They believe the monitors, the expertise, the certainty we project." She paused, and in her voice was the humility of hard-won wisdom. "You saved her life by questioning ours." Naomi's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different, not grief or vindication, but the overwhelming recognition of what had almost been lost. She deserved someone who wouldn't give up. Every baby does. Through the window, the morning shift began arriving, nurses and doctors who would soon learn that their equipment had been lying, that their protocols had failed, that a maid had seen what they'd all missed. Some would be defensive, others would be devastated. All would be changed. Thomas Keene appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, his expression grave but determined. "Mr. Wainwright, the preliminary audit has found 3 additional units with calibration issues. We're issuing a facility-wide alert and contacting every family who had a child in those units over the past 6 months." Elliot nodded slowly. "Good. And the investigation into who knew about the failures?" "Ongoing. But I can tell you this. It goes higher than Ms. Feldman." King glanced at Naomi with something like respect. "If you hadn't stayed, if you hadn't pushed, we might never have known. Most people won't stay long enough to remember who actually saved her. They'll credit the doctors who corrected their mistakes, the systems that eventually worked, the institutions that reformed after being caught. They'll forget the maid who trusted her eyes over their expertise, who loved a baby enough to risk looking foolish." But Elliot would remember. He stood and extended his hand to Naomi, not the condescending gratitude of employer to servant, but the recognition of one human being to another who'd fought in the trenches when he couldn't. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing my daughter when I was too broken to see clearly myself." Naomi took his hand, and in her grip was the quiet strength that had carried Claire through the valley of institutional failure. "She's a fighter, Mr. Wainwright. She always was. She just needed someone to notice." In her incubator, as if on cue, baby Claire opened her eyes, dark and alert and beautifully, impossibly alive. Systems don't save lives. People who refuse to step away do. The monitors beat their truthful rhythms. The investigation would continue. The reforms would come. But in that moment, in that small space between what almost happened and what actually did, 3 people understood a truth that transcends medicine, money, and machinery. Sometimes salvation arrives not in the form of expertise or technology, but in the simple, stubborn refusal of one person to accept that death is inevitable when life is still fighting. And sometimes that's enough.